This reading is found in Metaphysics and Epistemology, a guided anthology, edited by Stephen Hetherington, published by Wiley Blackwell. Section 10. Is the physical world all there is? Frank Jackson, Epiphenomenal Qualia, read by Regal Martinez, San Francisco, California. Section 10. Is the physical world all there is? Frank Jackson, Epiphenomenal Qualia. Physicalism tells us that the world, all of it, is physical. We might welcome this metaphysical image as accommodating, especially well, the manifest growth of modern science. For we might regard a physical world, and only a physical world, as an apt object of scientific investigation. We might also think that science is, in principle, our best means of uncovering whatever is real. Would a completed science, assuming for the present argument that such a landmark is possible, therefore constitute an exhaustive portrayal of all there is? A physicalist such as D.M. Armstrong in the previous reading could well believe so. Not all philosophers would agree with him, though. This reading famously disputes that picture of physicalism's promise. The reading is from Frank Jackson, an eminent Australian philosopher, most recently at Princeton University, known particularly for his writings on metaphysics and the philosophy of language. This excerpt's emphasis is on some aspects of mental reality, as part of Jackson's testing whether physicalism could indeed encompass all there is, because physicalism claims that all reality is physical. It implies that what we generally call mental reality is likewise actual physical. It can be difficult to appreciate this, given how readily and ordinarily people assume that their beliefs, feelings, purposes, and so on, simply by being mental, are not physical. This argument of Jackson's, called the knowledge argument, could be thought to provide some support for that popular presumption by challenging physicalism and thereby drawing an image of the world as including mental but not physical properties. Still, Jackson is not arguing directly for beliefs, feelings, purposes, and so on simply never being physical. He is arguing that there can be non-physical properties of at least some of our mental aspects. Nevertheless, if he is right about this, then not every component of reality is physical. In fact, Jackson goes further, and in terms that conflict substantially with those we notice in the reading from Armstrong. Jackson argues that these non-physical properties, these qualia of our inner experiences, have no causal powers. They are epiphenomenal, present, but causally inert or isolated. In contrast, we saw that Armstrong's conception of minds regards descriptions of pertinent causal connections as able to be describing all that is mental. How Armstrong did acknowledge the difficulty of accounting for qualia within a full metaphysical account. He called these the phenomenal properties of our experiences. Even so, Armstrong did not infer from the existence of such qualities that not all is physical, but Jackson does make that inference. And how does Jackson's reasoning proceed? Pay particular attention to his tale of Mary, for such subsequent metaphysics has done so. Hers is a colorful story. It is undeniably that the physical, chemical, and biological sciences have provided a great deal of information about the world we live in and about ourselves. I will use the label physical information for this kind of information, and also for information that automatically comes along with it. For example, if a medical scientist tells me enough about the processes that go on in my nervous system and about how they relate to happenings in the world around me, to what has happened in the past and is likely to happen in the future, to what happens to other similar and dissimilar organisms, and the like, he or she tells me, if I am clever enough to fit it together appropriately, about what is often called the functional role of those states in me and in organisms in general in similar cases. This information and its kin I also label physical. I am what is sometimes known as a qualia freak. I think that there are certain features of the bodily sensations, especially, but also of certain perceptual experiences, which no amount of purely physical information includes. Tell me everything physical there is to tell about what is going on in a living brain, the kind of states, their functional role, their relation to what goes on at other times and in other brains, and so on and so forth. And be I as clever as can be in fitting it all together. You won't have told me about the hurtfulness of pains, the itchiness of itches, pangs of jealousy, or about the characteristic experience of tasting a lemon, smelling a rose, hearing a loud noise, or seeing the sky. There are many qualia freaks, and some of them say that their rejection of physicalism is an unargued intuition. I think that they are being unfair to themselves. They have the following argument. Nothing you could tell of a physical sort captures the smell of a rose. For instance, therefore, physicalism is false. By our lights, this is a perfectly good argument. It is obviously not to the point to question its validity, and the premise is intuitively, obviously true, both of them, and to me. I must, however, admit that it is weak from a polemical point of view. There are, unfortunately for us, many who do not find the premise intuitively obvious. The task, then, is to present an argument whose premises are obviously to all, are obvious to all, or at least to as many as possible. This I try to do with what I will call the knowledge argument. 1. The knowledge argument for qualia. People vary considerably in their ability to discriminate colors. Suppose that in an experiment to catalog this variation, Fred is discovered. Fred has better color vision than anyone else on record. He makes every discrimination that anyone has ever made. And moreover, he makes one that we cannot even begin to make. Show him a batch of ripe tomatoes, and he sorts them into two roughly equal groups, and does so with complete consistency. That is, if you blindfold him, shuffle the tomatoes up, and then remove the blindfold and ask him to sort them out again, he sorts them into exactly the same two groups. We ask Fred how he does it. He explains that all ripe tomatoes do not look the same color to him, and in fact that this is true of a great many objects that we classify together as red. He sees two colors where we see one, and he has in consequence developed for his own use two words, red and red, to mark the difference. Perhaps he tells us that he has often tried to teach the difference between red and red, between red 1 and red 2, to his friends, but has gotten nowhere, and has concluded that the rest of the world is red 1, red 2, colorblind, or perhaps he has had partial success with his children. It doesn't matter. In any case, he explains to us that it would be quite wrong to think that because red appears in both red 1 and red 2, that the two colors are shades of the one color. He only uses the common term red to fit more easily into our restricted usage. To him, red 1 and red 2 are as different from each other and all the other colors as yellow is from blue. And his discriminatory behaviors bears this out. He sorts red 1 from red 2 tomatoes with the greatest of ease in a wide variety of viewing circumstances. Moreover, an investigation of the physiological basis of Fred's exceptional ability reveals that Fred's optical system is able to separate out two groups of wavelengths in the red spectrum as sharply as we are able to sort out yellow from blue. I think that we should admit that Fred can see, really see, at least one more color than we can. Red 1 is a different color from red 2. What kind of experience does Fred have when he sees red 1 and red 2? What is the new color or colors like? We would dearly like to know, but do not. And it seems that no amount of physical information about Fred's brain and optical system tells us. We find out, perhaps, that Fred cones responds differently to certain light waves in the red section of the spectrum that make no difference to ours, and that this leads in Fred to a wider range of those brain states responsible for visual discriminatory behavior. But none of this tells us what we really want to know about his color experience. There is something about it we don't know, but we know, we may suppose, everything about Fred's body, his behavior, and dispositions to behavior, and about his internal physiology, and everything about his history and relation to others that can be given in physical accounts of persons. We have all the physical information. Therefore, knowing all this is not knowing everything about Fred. It follows that physicalism leaves something out. Fred and the new color are, of course, essentially rhetorical devices. The same point can be made with normal people and familiar colors. Mary is a brilliant scientist who is, for whatever reason, forced to investigate the world from a black and white room via a black and white television monitor. She specializes in the neurophysiology of vision and acquires, let us suppose, all the physical information there is to obtain about what goes on when we see ripe tomatoes or the sky, and use terms like red, blue, and so on. She discovers, for example, just which wavelength combinations from the sky stimulate the retina, and exactly how this produces via the central nervous system the contraction of the vocal cords and expulsion of air from the lungs that results in the uttering of the sentence, "The sky is blue." What will happen when Mary is released from her black and white room or is given a color television monitor? Will she learn anything or not? It seems just obvious that she will learn something about the world and our visual experience of it. But then it is inescapable that her previous knowledge was incomplete, but she had all the physical information. Ergo, there is more to have than that, and physicalism is false. Clearly, the same style of knowledge argument could be deployed for taste, hearing, the bodily sensations, and generally speaking for the various mental states which are said to have raw fields, phenomenal features, or qualia. The conclusion in each case is that the qualia are left out of the physicalist story, and the polemical strength of the knowledge argument is that it is so hard to deny the central claim that one can have all the physical information without having all the information there is to have. 2. The modal argument. By the modal argument, I mean an argument of the following style. Skeptics about other minds are not making a mistake in deductive logic. Whatever else may be wrong with their position, no amount of physical information about another logically entails that he or she is conscious or feels anything at all. Consequently, there is a possible world with organisms exactly like us in every physical respect. And remember, that includes functional states' physical history at all, but which differ from us profoundly in that they have no conscious mental life at all. But then, what is it that we have and they lack? Not anything physical, ex hypothesi. In all physical regards, we and they are exactly alike. Consequently, there is more to us than the purely physical. Thus, physicalism is false. It is sometimes objected that the modal argument misconceives physicalism on the ground that the doctrine is advanced as a contingent truth. But to say that this is only to say that physicalists restrict their claim to some possible worlds, including especially ours, and the modal argument is only directed against this lesser claim. If we in our world, let alone beings in any others, had features additional to those of our physical replicas in other possible worlds, then we have non-physical features or qualia. The trouble, rather, with the modal argument is that it rests on a disputable modal intuition. Disputable because it is disputed. Some sincerely deny that there can be physical replicas of us in other possible worlds, which nevertheless lack consciousness. Moreover, at least one person who once had the intuition now has doubts. Head counting may seem a poor approach to a discussion of the modal argument, but frequently we can do no better when modal intuitions are in question. And remember, our initial goal was to find the argument with the greatest polemical utility. Of course, qua protagonist of the knowledge argument, we may well accept the modal intuition in question, but this will be a consequence of our already having an argument to the conclusion that qualia are left out of the physicalist story, not our ground for that conclusion. Moreover, the matter is complicated by the possibility that the connection between matters physical and qualia is like that sometimes held to obtain between aesthetic qualities and natural ones. Two possible worlds which agree in all natural respects, including the experience of sentient creatures, must agree in all aesthetic qualities also, but it is plausibly held that the aesthetic qualities cannot be reduced to the natural. Section 3. The what is it like to be argument. In What is it like to be a bat? Thomas Nagel argues that no amount of physical information can tell us what it is like to be a bat, and indeed that we human beings cannot imagine what it is like to be a bat. His reason is that what this is like can only be understood from a bat's point of view, which is not our point of view and is not something capturable in physical terms, which are essentially terms understandable equally from many points of view. It is important to distinguish this argument from the knowledge argument. When I complained that all the physical knowledge about Fred was not enough to tell us what his special color experience was like, I was not complaining that we weren't finding out what is it like to be Fred. I was complaining that there is something about his experience, a property of it, of which we were left ignorant. And if and and we come to know what this property is, we still not know what it is like to be Fred, but we will know more about him. No amount of knowledge about Fred, be it physical or not, amounts to knowledge from the inside. Concerning Fred, we are not Fred. There is thus a whole set of items of knowledge expressed by forms of words like that it is I, myself, who is, which Fred has, and we simply cannot have because we are not him. When Fred sees the color he alone can see, one thing he knows is the way his experience of it differs from his experience of seeing red and so on. Another is that he himself is seeing it. Physicalists and qualia freaks alike should acknowledge that no amount of information of whatever kind that others have about Fred amounts to knowledge of the second. My complaint, though, concerned the first, was that the special quality of his experience is certainly a fact about it, and one which physicalism leaves out because no amount of physical information told us what it is. 4. The bogey of epiphenomenalism. Is there any really good reason for refusing the countenance the idea that qualia are causally impotent with respect to the physical world? I will argue for the answer no. But in doing this, I will say nothing about two views associated with the classical epiphenomenalist position. The first is that mental states are inefficacious with respect to the physical world. All I will be concerned to defend is that it is possible to hold that certain properties of certain mental states, namely those I've called qualia, are such that their possession or absence makes no difference to the physical world. The second is that the mental is totally causally inefficacious. For all I will say, it may be that you have to hold that the instantation of qualia makes a difference to other mental states, though not to anything physical. Indeed, general considerations to do with how you could come to be aware of the instantation of qualia suggest such a position. 3 reasons are standardly given for holding that a quale, like the hurtfulness of a pain, must be causally efficacious in the physical world. And so, for instance, that its instantation must sometimes make a difference to what happens in the brain. None, I will argue, has any real force. It is supposed to be just obvious that the hurtfulness of pain is partly responsible for the subject seeking to avoid pain, saying it hurts and so on. But, to reverse Hume, anything can fail to cause anything. No matter how often B follows A, and no matter how initially obvious the causality of the connection seems, the hypothesis that A causes B can be overturned by an overarching theory which shows the two as distant effects of a commonly underlying causal process. To the untutored, the image of the screen of Lee Marvin's first moving from left to right, immediately followed by the image of John Wayne's head moving in the same general direction, looks as causal as anything. And of course, throughout countless Western images similar to the first are followed by images similar to the second. All this counts for precisely nothing when we know that overarching theory concerning how the relevant images are both effects of an underlying causal process involving the projector and the film. The epiphenomenalist can say exactly the same about the connection between, for example, hurtfulness and behavior. It is simply a consequence of the fact that certain happenings in the brain cause both. The second objection relates to Darwin's theory of evolution. According to natural selection, the traits that evolve over time are those conducive to physical survival. We may assume that qualia evolved over time. We have them. The earliest forms of life do not, and so we should expect qualia to be conducive to survival. The objection is that they could hardly help us to survive if they do nothing to the physical world. The appeal of this argument is undeniable, but there is a good reply to it. Polar bears have particularly thick, warm coats. The theory of evolution explains this, we suppose, by pointing out that having a thick, warm coat is conducive to survival in the Arctic, but having a thick coat goes along with having a heavy coat, and having a heavy coat is not conducive to survival. It slows the animal down. Does this mean that we have refuted Darwin because we have found an evolved trait, having a heavy coat, which is not conducive to survival? Clearly not. Having a heavy coat is an unavoidable concomitant of having a warm coat. In the context, modern insulation was not available, and the advantages for survival of having a warm coat outweigh disadvantages of having a heavy one. The point is that all we can extract from Darwin's theory is that we should expect any evolved characteristics to be either conducive to survival or a byproduct of one that is so conducive. The epiphenomenalist holds that qualia fall into the latter category. They are a byproduct of certain brain processes that are highly conducive to survival. The third objection is based on a point about how we come to know about other minds. We know about other minds by knowing about other behavior, at least in part. The nature of the inference is a matter of some controversy, but it is not a matter of controversy that it proceeds from behavior. That is why we think that stones do not feel and dogs do feel. But runs the objection, how can person's behavior provide any reason for believing he has qualia like mine, or indeed any qualia at all, unless this behavior can be regarded as the outcome of the qualia? Man Friday's footprint was evidence of the man Friday because footprints are causal outcomes of feet attached to people, and an epiphenomenalist and an epiphenomenalist cannot regard behavior or indeed anything physical as an outcome of qualia. But consider my reading in the Times that Spurs won. This provides excellent evidence that the Telegraph has also reported that Spurs won, despite the fact that I trust the Telegraph does not get the results from the Times. They each send their own reporters to the game. The Telegraph's report is in no sense an outcome of the Times, but the latter provides good evidence for the former nevertheless. The reasoning involved can be reconstructed thus. I read in the Times that the Spurs won. This gives me a reason to think that Spurs won because I know that Spurs winning is the most likely candidate to be what caused the report in the Times. But I also know that Spurs winning would have had many effects, including almost certainly a report in the Telegraph. I am arguing from one effect back to its cause and out again to another effect. The fact that neither effect causes the other is irrelevant. Now, the epiphenomenalist allows this qualia are effects of what goes on in the brain. Qualia causes nothing physical, but are caused by something physical. Hence, the epiphenomenalist can argue from the behavior of others to the qualia of others by arguing from the behavior of others back to its causes in the brains of others and out again to their qualia. You may well feel, for one reason or another, that there is more dubious chain of reasoning than its model in the case of newspaper reports. You are right. The problem of other minds is a major philosophical problem. The problem of other newspaper reports is not. But there is no special problem of epiphenomenalism, as opposed to, say, interactionism here. There is a very understandable response to the three replies I have just made. All right, there is no knockdown refutation of the existence of epiphenomenal qualia, but the fact remains that they are an excrescence. They do nothing, they explain nothing. They serve merely to soothe the intuition of dualists, and it is left a total mystery how they fit into the world of science. In short, we do not and cannot understand the how and why of them. This is perfectly true, but it is no objection to qualia, for it rests on an overly optimistic view of the human animal and its powers. We are the products of evolution. We understand and sense what we need to understand and sense in order to survive. Epiphenomenal qualia are totally irrelevant to survival. At no stage of our evolution did natural selection favor those who could make sense of how they are caused and the laws governing them, or in fact why they exist at all. And that is why we can't. End of section 10. Is the physical world all there is? Frank Jackson. Epiphenomenal qualia. Found in Metaphysics and Epistemology, a guided anthology. Edited by Stephen Hetherington. Published by Wiley Blackwell. Read by Rigo Martinez. San Francisco, California.